It is sunny out there, and everyone should be checking how hot is it going to be, especially if you have people out there in the field working. And I'm checking my phone to see what's the weather today. So I invite you to take your app out. Hopefully, you have it installed as the NIOSH Heat app, and it looks like a bright sun in the middle of a red background. Speaking of sun, that's why I put my yellow, sunny, bright jacket. It's all about heat illness, but the reason why I titled this one Beyond Water, Rust, and Shade is because we're pretty much now at a point in time where California employers know that to prevent heat illness is all about water, rust, and shade. So you've got this down and you feel pretty comfortable and you've done your program and you've heard webinars and so we've gotten comfortable with the water, rust, and shade. And so today is all about the combination of two different regulations, because starting July 2024, we saw that a new regulation for indoor heat illness was brought to the table, and it brought a lot of very strict requirements. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to combine both the outdoor and the indoor, and really what I have seen out there in the field as I visit your facilities and what works, what's working, what's not working. And a lot of these requirements weigh heavily on the shoulders of your supervisors. So if you're a supervisor watching this webinar, I am grateful that you're here. A lot of these requirements are placed upon management. And of course, it can't be just the one person doing safety for the entire company. This one person doing safety for your company who writes your policies and who rolls them out, whatever, he or she is tasked with delegating all of these requirements to the supervisors and training. And there's an actual requirement for training the supervisors under the regulations, both outdoor and indoor heat, to ensure that this gets done. So a lot to cover, good stuff. I expect to have questions, so I'll leave some time at the end, or if you want to, as I cover content, raise your hand or ask questions is great. If it's outside of what I'm covering at that moment, I'll wait till the end of the presentation to ensure that you guys get an answer. So let's get into it. And remember that I always give you guys updates. So I'm going to briefly touch on something that came to our attention by Cal OSHA July 1st this year. My information is on the screen. You can look me up. I'm bilingual. Get us to come to your workplace. I've been doing this since 2011. I opened up my consulting firm since 2011, and I've been working with NIOSH, the Southern Education Research Center, for a very long time. I don't really know how many years, but it was right about when COVID started. We wanted to get information to every single employer. All right, so that's my info. My objectives, the three things that I want you to walk out with today to be able to change something and instill safety and health at the workplace, because that's the goal of this webinar, is that we will take something back to work and make it work, right? We'll make change that people say, oh, this is different and I'm feeling better and this is great. Then the number one thing that I'm going to talk about is the actual requirement to have a written program. There's some research that has been done about this, and specifically for construction, the Center for Research and Training, the CPWR, has awesome numbers and great information that I will be referring to. But just when we talk about construction, only a third of companies really do have a written program that they keep on site as is required. So that's something that we are lacking. And if you are in the general industry, warehousing especially, and companies with hot processes such as manufacturing of anything metal, manufacturing of plastics, and warehousing, really, where you don't have AC or air conditioning in your spaces, you are under risk of having employees that suffer heat illness. And if you don't have a written heat illness prevention plan, you will be cited by Cal OSHA when they get to knock on your door. So that's an important one. The second one, because I do want to give you guidance, how does that program need to look like? Where can you get a model program? And then the second one is all about acclimatization and how to document it. what I see out there every time I go and talk to employers, my clients, and specifically when talking to supervisors, is that they know about acclimatization. They know the term, they know it's been there forever, but see, this is beyond shade, water, and rest. Acclimatization is something that's been talked about for so long. And for California employers who are familiar with Title 8, California Code of Regulations 3395, which is outdoor places of employment, you've known about acclimatization. It's mentioned in the regulation. There's only 2 paragraphs for it. And we fail in the portion of how do we really acclimatize workers? What are we really doing? What does it really mean? And are we documenting, or how are we going to prove that we're really acclimatizing workers? It has been shown in some research that usually more than half of the fatalities in um, heat-related fatalities occur within the first week of work when you expose workers to heat. Therefore, the importance of acclimatization. And number 3, accountability, supervisor accountability through training, documentation, and demonstration of knowledge. So my supervisors, you guys are the best. I'm grateful for the work you do. Now I want to bring you the tools to actually make sure that I help you document these things. I know it brings more things to the table, but we are living in an era and age where it's not getting any cooler, it's getting hotter. Therefore, the importance of really getting this down. So we ask for your help, not because we just want to put more work on your plate, but because there's a requirement. There's been a requirement since the regulation for outdoor places of employment, and now an added requirement since 2024 or summer of 2024 when the indoor heat regulation came into being. So this is I know, just to kind of always give you some updates, and I'll tell you how it relates also to heat illness. The Senate Bill 1350, domestic service workers, came into being. It'll be enforced starting July 1st, 2025. What that has to do, or what is it, is an actual protection to household domestic service workers. And more than anything, it applies when businesses are hiring, or let's say you're the owner of a company and you have people that take care of the gardening in your house, and then you bring them to your business and you have them do some of the appearance at the entrance of your business. And they're not really the business employee, but because it's a household domestic employee that is giving services to you, to your business, they are covered under 1350 and California Code of Regulations 3203 for the Injury and Illness Prevention Program. And so basically what it says is, if you have, for example, house cleaning companies and home care agencies have to comply, their temporary permanent services to businesses, they have to comply with Title 8, all of the provisions, starting with the IIPP. Private households, if you are an employer that just gets someone to help you with, housekeeping at your home, it usually you're exempt. Maybe you get someone to cook for you or do a little bit of caregiving for your children, or maybe geriatric person that you have, somebody at home, just the cleaning at your house. You are not covered by this new requirement, but you may be covered when you hired specialized work, such as people to come and do maintenance, painting, construction, re-roofing, mold remediation, because those are things that require a licensed person, right? And so licensing requirements do matter in homeowners who hire unlicensed individuals, and those will fall within Title 8. That means you become the actual person who controls the work being done, and now you're covered under Title 8. Now, they also put a limit as to the project and the estimated cost of the project. So anything under $1,000 will not be included or covered, but anything with maintenance and things such as having your kitchen remodeled, it's for sure going to come above that $1,000 mark. And you have to take a look at who are you having working for you, because if you have unlicensed individuals at your home, then you become the employer and you're responsible for ensuring safe and healthful conditions. And with all of this comes also heat, right? Because if you have gardeners, if you have people that are fixing your roof or doing things of this nature, heat is an issue as well. And people may complain to OSHA, and this is when things can get a little bit hairy for you. So let's dive into, now I give you some updates so that you know a little bit of the Cal OSHA news and what's happening. But I also want to make sure we direct our attention back to heat illness, because I have supervisors on this call and I want to make sure I give you tools. This is one thing that I think I sent it out last year in one of my newsletters. And if you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, please do so, because I always send just a one page. I know you're too busy. You're very, very busy. You have no time for newsletters that are lengthy. So I only write one page, and it's very succinct, and I give you the nitty-gritty of whatever is happening. The first of the month, I send it out to all my clients. So make sure that you give us your email if you're interested in my newsletter. Now, this news release last year was eye-opening. So December 12th, 2024, Cal OSHA sent this news release letting us know that they issued more than $250,000 citation for willful serious heat violations. And it was the first one in 5 years for a willful serious. That means employer knew they had to have heat illness provisions in place to prevent heat illness, and they did not. And in 2022, they had already had OSHA visit them and tell them to correct certain issues, and they didn't. So that's when it becomes willful and serious, because people can die from heat. So this should open your eyes, because this was for a landscape maintenance. Of course, this is outdoor work. But here is the stuff that should really get your attention. So this happened June 2024. That's when they visited. And the newsletter is for December. But listen to this. The company lacked written procedures. There you go. This is why it's so important that today we pay attention as to what needs to be in your written procedures. The next thing is they did not have anything in regards to what should we do differently if the temperature exceeds 95 degrees Fahrenheit. This is something that is required for outdoor places of employment. And many of us treat the summer all the same, and we're just, oh yeah, it's hot, water, shade, and rest. This is why this presentation is beyond that, because when is 95 degrees or more, you are required to do a couple of things that is different. And supervisors, you're in charge of this. The first thing, and I want you to write it down, is you have to have a meeting with your crew or crews. You have to make sure that every day that it is 95 degrees or more, and they're going to be doing work out there, that you meet with them and you remind them of water, shade, rest, how to get it, how to replenish the water during the day, and what to do for symptoms and response for those symptoms. And also practice quickly how to respond in case of an emergency. So I do role play for my clients. We make sure that everybody has a good time and remembering, anchoring in their memory how to respond to someone who has or is showing symptoms of heat illness, or who is taking a turn for the worse and it's turning into heat stroke. How to know that. That's super important, right? Employees also had to purchase, this is super important, you guys. I highlighted it because many of my clients, when I start visiting your sites and I realize that workers go from home to their job sites. So they drive to different job sites, or they never get to go to headquarters. So they don't get to obtain water free of cost from the employer. They have to buy it. And I talked to Cal OSHA about this because I do have several of my clients with this issue where there's no headquarters. People get in now with the aid of all these smart devices, people get all of their workload by receiving it by email, or their, whatever application they open, and there's the work that they have to do, but they don't get water. And the regulation requires that you provide water free of cost, and that you also make sure that they replenish the water so that they always have at least 2 gallons of water per worker for each 8-hour shift. So imagine if it's 2 workers, that's 4 gallons of water. That's a lot of water to carry around, especially if you as a supervisor have no control of how they are getting out of their house, exiting their door, and not carrying water. So that's important, because a lot of you rely on them purchasing their own water. And then when I go out there and do inspections for you, which is a great idea to have your internal inspections and also hire a person like me to come in quarterly, which is what I do for several of you. and take a look at those issues. And then I see where's your water, and I ask these questions, and your people already know me, they've seen me there, they know I'm going to ask questions. Well, I forgot it today, or it's in my lunchbox, or oh, we're going to go to the gas station. And when I hear I'm going to go to the gas station, I always cringe, because that means they are buying their own water, right? So it's not that there's something wrong with going to the gas station, especially if you have a supervisor replenishing from the gas station in the middle of the day. But it is very different if it's planned, because you planned it as part of your replenishment procedures to go to the gas station, and it is mandated, and that's how you do it. Perfect. But if it's just randomly, oh no, we don't know how to get water. We just whenever we get thirsty, if my container is empty, then we'll run to the gas station. No, that's not gonna fly. That's gonna get you cited, just like with this landscaper. That's a breach of California's heat illness prevention standard. And so that's what happened to them, right? Okay, let me see. I do have some questions. Okay. So several requests for that one page newsletter. Perfect. And yes, of course, we always share the slideshow, and we try and get you all the information that you need to get the job done. So we do know that heat is the leading weather-related killer, right? Heat kills, and it kills more than hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, and lightning combined in our nation a year, right? So we're getting the occupational exposure to heat and hot environments document by the CDC, and it's actually a booklet. It is a very good book, highly informative. If you have a person in your workforce who wants to be the champion for heat illness prevention, I would highly advise that you get this in the mail. It's for free, and you just have to request it. Mine took probably 3 to 4 weeks to get to me, but I got a couple copies so that I could extend one if someone's interested. It's highly technical, but it's a really good document. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this is an important issue. It is the more with how the weather is getting hotter each year, the more we need to understand how that affects our workforce, because depending on our workforce age, risk, personal risk factors, health issues, medications, etc., we may have more issues of how heat affects their health. And many of these issues have gone unseen and not discussed for the longest time, but it is getting hotter, and we're seeing more issues such as, heart disease, that it is increasing amongst workers who are exposed to heat during their workday. And there is a direct correlation between those two. We have issues of kidney disease. We have issues of even psychiatric anxiety, stress, suicide increase because of how much you get exposed to heat. And it makes sense, you guys, because the heat that we are exposed to will affect how our heart works, how our brain works. We are 70% water. We can't forget that. So it is important to know that all of us, no matter if you go to the beach or when you work, your body starts working and it's straining. That's why the definition of heat strain in this document says heat strain is the physiological response to heat load, external or internal. So that's what you're experiencing, and that's your attempt to self-regulate, right? So you're starting to feel the heat because you're at the beach and you start sweating. You're starting to lose heat by, sweating and using what the body feels around it, such as the breeze, the wind, the humidity, right? So whenever we are exposed to heat, outdoor or indoor, our body strains to start maintaining that stabilizing condition of temperature in our core. Now, heat stress is different. Heat stress is the actual load of heat that we are exposing our workers to. And that's important to differentiate, because heat strain is how a person handles heat, and heat stress means this is all This is the actual conditions that I'm going to place you in. There's probably a boiler next to you. There's a machine. There's welding going on. Plus, I want you to wear this apron. So all of those things now will cause heat stress. So we need to keep a balance, and we need to make sure that we empower our supervisors and help them and give them the tools so that they keep the workers and their crews safe. Now, this is a little bit more in the link to what's going on right now with global temperature. It is estimated that we are 2.3 to 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than in the last 10 most recent years. So it is getting hotter. This problem is not going to go away, and it is affecting our workers in different ways. And this is now more known. This is widely known, and I am glad that this is being discussed more often. Now, let's start now by talking about those written procedures that you have to have. Supervisors, you got to know this policy. You got to read it. You have to own it. Uh, there is sample programs in the Cal OSHA webpage, and here is what it looks like. I can actually share the link, or you can just type Cal OSHA publications, and then it'll just scroll down and go to heat illness, and then you have the model program in Spanish, English, and all of the languages that you see here. I like the model program because the model program combines indoor and outdoor heat illness prevention. So they used to have an outdoor heat illness prevention sample program, and it was terrible. I mean, it was just a PDF. It was hard to modify, and it was just, I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. It took a long time to work off of that one. This one is a lot easier. It goes by section, so whatever section doesn't apply, you can erase completely. But it also guides you through with red lettering to knowing how to take this. It's a template. So if you can see here in the sample written heat illness prevention, all the red lettering, you just erase it and you put your customized information. So it's a really good model program. All I always ask you guys whenever you use a model program from Cal OSHA is to customize it and erase the words sample, model. So really, really customize it. I'll show you one example of what I've done for one of my clients at the end, so you'll see it. But it is important that you have a list of the actual requirements, and take a look at this. This is how important it is, and it really does go beyond water, shade, and rest. Take a look at this. The first thing you got to have on it is responsibility. So who's responsible for implementing this program? And of course, you're going to have the person who writes the policy, which would be your safety director. And this is where safety directors have sent me their policies and say, hey, can you review it? Let's go back and forth, see where we could get in trouble, because you could get in trouble by writing too much in your policy. So with responsibility, it should be one person, and then you can delineate how supervisors help you with which components of the actual plan or policy. In this written program, you're going to write down how you provide water. So this is where, if I go out there and your employees tell me, oh, I gotta go get water at the gas station because my lunchbox water bottle is empty, then I know that there might be a written program, but the provision of water is not known by the workers, and supervisors have no idea, because in here you should say the 2 gallons for each worker per each 8-hour shift. And how do you get that water to them? Either they go to the yard, or they get to the headquarters, or they go to the warehouse and they fill up that igloo with ice and water, and they don't use it as a cooler. It's actually to dispense water, and that's a 5-gallon igloo orange container that they will affix to their truck. Boom, excellent. So that's 2 workers. That igloo with 5 gallons does the job. But not all of you can carry around this big 5-gallon thing, and not all of you have only 2 workers per vehicle. Some of you have entire crews that just get to a site, and you got to make sure that you provide the water for them. So this is where you get to detail how you do this. And for indoor places of employment, you start saying each break room has a water dispenser with filtered water and a machine that makes ice with sensors. So with ice machines, I have big issues with those of you that allow workers to put their hands in with a shovel to get ice out. You will get a note from Cal OSHA saying, nope, this is not going to provide cool, suitably drinking water for the worker, because although it's potable water and the ice is being provided according to the regulation to keep it suitably cool, now you have the issue of dirty hands going in this bucket of ice. So you don't want that. All of this is in your procedures for the provision of water. So it has to be very specific as to how you are getting those 2 gallons per worker per each 8-hour shift. In the provision of water, you also have to assess and describe how you do replenishment. You cannot get away from that. And that is one of the things that I see most often missed by my clients, by the people that I start helping, is the replenishment. You cannot let that go. You have to say, how do we get more water if we can't get those 2 gallons to be carried by the worker from the beginning of their shift? Replenishment is very important, and you will be cited for not having it outlined in your policy and carried out in practice. So like I said, the gas station thing is okay as long as it is planned, not something that is random. Because the truth is, and I do have issues with workers saying, oh, yeah, I wasn't feeling good. It's because, we ran out of water and none of us wanted to go to the gas station and buy more. So we just kept going. And then at the end of the day, I was feeling a little bit dizzy. And when I went home, I started throwing up. You see how this can go wrong? And that goes against what the requirement of the regulation is, which is to encourage the drinking of suitably cool potable water. And all of these are words straight from the regulation, is not making them up, right? Encouraging is a word within Title 8, 3395 and 3396, which is outdoor and indoor. Okay, so a lot to the provision of water. Make sure that is there. How you provide the water, 2 gallons per worker, and also how do you replenish the water, right? Don't get into too much detail as to how you're going to keep the water clean. Just do it in practice. What do I mean by that? I have a lot of issues with people not changing the filters in water dispensing machines. People don't want to drink the water from your filters because they know it's awful. It's awful water. It tastes funny. That no one changes the filters. There's no way of knowing who changes the filters and if anybody has ever changed. So don't get into details of that. Just do it. Have someone provide a record of how often they're changing those filters, but don't put it in your policy, because then if for some reason they ask you for that documentation, then you're in violation of your own policy and you can be cited. So next one is procedures to access cool down areas. Okay, so now you have to tell people, where do they get to rest that it is cooler than the area where they're working at, which is above 80 degrees if it's outdoors, or 82 degrees if it's indoors, and they wear some sort of aprons or Tyvek suits, or if it's 87 degrees and they're inside a warehouse, even if they don't wear anything, because the indoor heat illness prevention program has a little bit of a difference in trigger temperatures. So where are those cool down areas for indoor heat? Break rooms. Break rooms are perfect so long as you can fit enough people and they're comfortably sitting, and the body heat is not going to be where it makes the area stuffy. It's got to be where they really truly cool down. So you got to supervise, you got to see, is that break room, does that break room has AC? If you are designating an outdoor area as your cool down area, because that can be done, that's allowed. Sometimes you have your building and the warehouse, one of those walls is always throwing some shade or casting some shade that makes that portion of the outside building very cool. And particularly in the morning or late afternoon, it gets really cool there, nice and breezy. You can assign that as a cool down area, but you need to measure the temperature because it needs to be 82 degrees or less. And this is for indoor heat. Don't dismay. I know this is a lot of info, but when you go down the components, as I'm telling you, and you use either the sample program or one of my programs, then it'll guide you through it. You will not miss any of these requirements. And once you send it back to me to review it, we go back and forth with, hey, is this going to get me in trouble? Because putting too much will definitely bring that question as to, are you really doing this? For example, I had a client who wanted to put down there that employees are not allowed to bring their insulated containers because they cannot verify that they're always clean, which is another, way of saying, hey, that's true. If I allow them to bring their insulated containers, how am I going to know that they're clean? Well, maybe the randomly supervisor goes out there on the at the job site on the floor and checks that those containers are clean, right? That they're washing them. But don't put it in your program, because then that binds you to that. Access to shade for other places of employment, which is different from a break room. Although if you have other places of employment where you can have an AC break room, perfect. If not, you have to, you know, build those canopies or tents or areas with good shade so that they can drink water and sit down, again, where the body heat of sitting next to each other doesn't make it where you can't cool down. Supervisors are in charge of making sure that the shade is actual shade that is going to allow the body to cool down. Then we have procedures for temperature assessment. This is an interesting one. I've been going out there. I see you guys buying thermometers. Every time you ask me what thermometer you should buy, I always tell you, you can go with the cheap ones as long as they give you the temperature and the regular temperature, which is the dry bulb temperature, and humidity. So it's a hygrometer, right? So the $30 ones will give you both, but then you have to have a chart with the heat index, because the regulation says that you have to know how hot is it, and you have to record or write down the hottest, either dry bulb temperature or heat index, which is the feels like temperature. So you can buy thermometers that give you the three measurements, the actual temperature, humidity, and heat index, so that your supervisors can write down which one is highest. I have a form that I put together for you guys with instructions. It's a 2-page form where supervisors just go and read the instructions at what time they need to take measurements, which is beginning of shift and whenever it's expected to be the hottest of the day. And so it's an easy way to remind supervisors when to take these measurements. Now, many of you heard me do webinars when these regulations was still in the draft time that they were just drafting this regulation. KALOSHA was drafting. And I was talking about the fact that there was a loophole where you could just say, hey, I am just going to assume that it is always above 82 when they wear clothing that restricts heat loss, and also 87, because I know when it's the summer, it's always above 87. I'm just going to assume it and not keep track of the temperature. I'm not going to measure it. I'm not going to record it. And yes, there's that hole in the regulation that would allow you to do that. But in discussions with clients, in practicality, in discussions with KALOSHA, how are you going to know how hot is it to implement controls if you don't have a thermometer around? And how are you going to know and make decisions as to, hey, this fan is doing the job versus, well, I don't know if this fan is doing the job, if you don't take measurements of the temperature? So putting those thermometers and writing down these temperatures is a must, even if you think that you don't really have to. I am just going with KALOSHA's recommendation of, hey, just do it. It doesn't take long to look at those thermometers, write it down, see what you need to implement, and document. It's what is required. We are in California. Strictest regulations in the country here in California, Oregon, and Washington. So you're it. So lots of stuff here. Procedures for monitoring the weather. You need to have your supervisors visit the site for the National Weather Service, and you need to have your supervisors download the NIOSH Heat app, the one with the little sun and the red background. And they need to plan how to change the workload for those days when it's either a heat wave, or whenever you have new workers, or whenever the temperature of the day is just too hot to work safely. And when we say too hot, it's because all of you know already that the outdoor heat illness prevention program says 95 degrees or more is considered high heat, and you need to issue reminders, and people need to know to drink more water, etc. Well, for the indoor, they don't talk about high heat procedures, but I am kind of recommending my clients to just apply it uniformly, because most of you with a warehouse, you will have forklifts out in the yard. So your policy combines both outdoor and indoor, right? So if at 95 degrees, you are having to meet with those forklift drivers that are going to be out there in the yard, might as well make it a company wide. It's a good reminder. It makes sense, right? It makes sense. It keeps everybody safe to gather everybody and have that meeting. Remind them to drink water. Even sound horns like they do for agriculture to remind them to drink water. So that's 7. 8, control measures for indoor places of employment. So now that you know the temperature, you're recording it, what are you doing to bring the temperature down? And this is where it gets very interesting, because if you don't do it, if you don't start installing thermometers and taking a look at what's happening out there, you don't know when you need a wet bulb thermometer. So Kestrel, and this is not, and I've always told you guys, I am not sponsored by any of the products that I discussed during these talks. Neither is the Southern California Education and Research Center. But we just have to talk about what works. And the Kestrel 5400, it's a very good option for those of you radiant heat. So if you have workers doing welding or breweries, you have tanks and mixing tanks. And for those of you in manufacturing process with plastics and anything metal, you will have those areas of the workplace that are hotter than the rest of your warehouse, etc. So place your thermometers, and then as you go right along reading those temperatures, you will see that those areas that are radiant heat, and there's a definition, 5 degrees higher than the regular temperature. So you're going to have a lot of those radiant heat areas. You are supposed to implement controls to bring the temperature down to 82 degrees. And it also says feasible, means you're going to try your best. That doesn't mean that you're going to really achieve bringing the temperature down to 82 degrees. You're going to actually put together a combination of engineering controls such as fans or swamp coolers, and administrative controls such as rotating personnel or making the shift shorter, etc. And last but not least, PPE, like what? Buying them like towels to wrap around their necks that keep cool for 2 hours, or vests that cool the body, or one of my favorite things right now that firefighters are using at the Norwal palm coolers. And again, it's a product, but there's so many other products right now that are out there. So firefighters, where because they are exposed to very high heat, I mean, flames in front of their face, right? And their exertion, it's hard for their bodies to cool. They have to wear all this PPE, heavy equipment, and be exposed to heat. So one of the things that they were combining is they were doing they're trying out products, but they're also trying out procedures on how to cool their body temperature. And they were bringing cool containers where they could put their forearm to see if by cooling the arms down, the circulation of the blood would actually achieve some of that core body temperature to come down. And through their studies and laboratory research, etc., and NIOSH studies, we know that the capillarities in the hands, more than the forearm, will allow for body cooling, core body temperature to drop. So there are some devices for palm cooling that are available as well. So for those of you with radiant heat, that need, if you really need to keep workers on the floor exposed to this type of temperatures, look into palm cooling, because it'll allow them to stay, to bring their body temperature, their core body temperature down, and will help them stay more productive and self-regulate temperature, even though they are exposed to hot temperatures. So it's a play of what's going on at the workplace, what works, how the person feels, and following up. So a lot to do, but nevertheless, I am here to bring you what's available. Palm cooling, it's newer technology, is more expensive. So start with a cheaper version of body cooling, right? Such as the towels around the neck. There's some very cheap ones. Go for something a little bit more long lasting, such as the ones that you can take to regular sink, dunk them in water, and now they keep cool for 4 hours. So invest in the $40 ones versus the $17 or $9 ones that will not do much, especially if your area of work is very, very hot. High heat procedures, like I said, 95 degrees or more, you have to gather around every day that it is 95 degrees or more and they are outdoors. Remind them to take how do you call these? Breaks. With the breaks, it's important that you remind them that they don't need to wait 2 hours for their break, as in any other day. right? So by law, labor code says every 2 hours, a worker is entitled to a break, and then for every 6 hours of work to a meal break of 30 minutes minimum, right? Well, many times workers feel that they have to wait until that break to go rest in the shade and drink water. You have to remind them that that is not so. Once it is 80 degrees for workers who work outdoors, they have the right to sit down and drink water and rest in the shade for a minimum of 5 minutes, especially if they have symptoms, and until the symptoms abate. And this is something that they don't know because we're not telling them, because we're afraid that everybody's going to be lazy, when in reality, heat makes you slower. So yes, if you don't help them cool down and you don't tell them to rest often, you are going to have a lot of slow workers versus if you allow them and tell them to take breaks. And my recommendation here is to add mandatory breaks for those in radiant heat areas as well, so that you keep them more productive. Okay, so all of these in number 10. Procedures for acclimatization is very much missed. We want to make sure that we decide what will work for our workers. So if you're a landscaper, for example, just going up a hill with debris and dirt, for a new worker, it should be, instead of a full wheelbarrow, it should be half a wheelbarrow. And whenever you make it company wide, people understand, because a lot of my supervisors in the beginning just raise their hand and say, hey, but I don't want to baby anyone just because they're new. The rest of the workers are going to be mad at me. Well, that's what training and education does, especially if you talk to them about this new regulation and all of the things that you're learning, and that you are supposed to treat those new workers differently during the first 2 weeks of their employment with you. Then the rest, the old timers know, or your established workers know, and they go, yeah, you're right. I remember when you did that for me. So that's very different. But we have to actually have some way of acclimatizing them by not exposing them too long to the heat, 80 degrees or more for outdoor workers, or 82 if they are in a high radiant heat, or wear clothing that restricts uh, loss of body heat, or at 87 degrees when there's no issue of PPE that doesn't allow them to cool off. So all of those things need to be in place in your written procedure. Now, for emergency response, it is important that you say how you're going to respond to these emergencies, whether or not your workforce has issues of language where they may feel nervous because, someone has fainted, they got to respond to the heat illness, and then they have to use the phone to call 911 and they don't know how to speak English. So that has to be in there. How are you going to help them when this happens? Who are you going to assign to make the call that speaks English? Also, where are they at? If it's indoors and you have a facility where the layout is a little bit difficult to reach, how are you going to guide those responders to get to that area of the warehouse? Or how are you going to guide them to get to that area of your golf course where your landscapers or whoever is at the ninth hole? Well, how will they reach them in case of an emergency? That has to be laid out here precisely to how you're going to do it. And this is why you need to customize that written procedure. You got to also write down how you handle a sick worker. And this is where we talk about, you don't need to be first aid CPR trained to cool the body down when someone has symptoms. And this is what we'll do, a little bit role play as to, spray the worker, make sure that you sit them down, that you take off layers of clothing, etc. You'll see me doing this during training with you. And then procedures for working and supervisor training. That's a whole list of things so that you don't miss what they need to be trained on. All right, so those are the components of your written program. If you're missing any of this, let us know. We can help you review your policy or get you a new one that you can actually put in place. And you have to have it present at each of the work sites. So this is one of those policies that is rare, but it has to be present. So wherever the workers are, the written document needs to be present. I add this to all of my policies. I always put a list of appendix because I want to give you guys tools. So I put their risk factors. I put the sample from the CDC list, which talks about, hey, you guys, if you have medications, you are at risk. If you're 65 and over, you're at risk. If you are, if you have allergies and you are taking allergy medication, you're at risk. That one, you need to put that. Also environmental factors, right? Such as if you work outdoors and you work in areas of work where there's concrete, the concrete radiates heat. That's a radiant heat area. So that's an environmental risk factor. all of that in a handout, 2-page handout that I add to my policy. The next one is acclimatization. So you should have your customized acclimatization, or at least the sample one from NIOSH, where it says, on the first day for a new worker, only 20% of the time that you would put a worker to be exposed to 80 degrees or more, a new worker, only 20% on day one, right? And that's what you have to have, an actual example, so that supervisors can look at it. Oh, okay, so 20%, that means if today we have this much work, etc. Appendix C is the urine color test poster. These are things that are not mandated, but I like to add because supervisors, you need tools. You need to know how to train people. And this one, I like it because it's a poster that shows the color of urine. So the darker or the browner it is, the more dehydrated a person is, that kind of thing. Heat stress work rest schedules. This one is also CDC NIOSH, and it allows for workers to see if you do light or moderate or heavy work, how often should you be taking breaks? So this is a very good one as well. And I'll show them to you in a little bit. I just want you to see the list first and what they're all about. Heat stress, first aid for heat illness. So we want to give you like a quick, how do you respond, right, to each of this layer of symptoms. So it goes from maybe a rash to a headache and fatigue to cramps, which is more mild. So it goes from light symptoms to more mild and severe, all the way to heat stroke, where one of the most the symptoms that I always stress during our training is if the person has slurred speech or they're confused, mentally confused, they are suffering heat stroke, and you need to make sure 911 is called. So knowing the difference between the beginning or early symptoms of heat illness all the way to what are the signs of someone suffering heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat stroke are very, very important. And my supervisors need to know this down pat. Okay, so what else? The checklist so that supervisors know what to have handy every day that is hot. Kalosha's sample tailgate meeting roster. So I put a form together as well for you guys to follow, just a quick A, B, C, D. What do you need to talk about in 5-10 minutes? And then everybody signs so that you have documented evidence that you're doing what you're required during high heat. What is high heat? 95 degrees or more for outdoor. And then indoor heat illness temperature measure record, a 2-page form for my supervisors to write down those measurements and to implement controls. So I have to make it easy for you. Otherwise, this becomes just so difficult to follow. Heat wave real life example so that you guys remember what a heat wave is per the regulation, not what the news say, because the news will say, oh, temperature breaking record, but don't wait for that. You have to plan. And the regulation says, actually not the regulation, the indoor heat illness sample plan says that supervisors, and it's interesting because the sample plan calls for supervisors to start planning how to change the work when it is hot, when you see that the temperatures are 70 degrees or more. I found it interesting because it's not in the reg, but it is in the sample program, which is a good suggestion for supervisors to say, okay, so once it hits 70 degrees, I know that it is going up in temperature and that I need to look at the weather for the next 10 days to plan. When should I change the time that we go out there to work? When should I shorten the actual day? When should I alternate workers more often? That kind of thing. Employee acclimatization form. How are you actually acclimatizing people? So an actual form. It's non-mandatory, of course, but you can use it. And then having the regulation in your policy so that supervisors can go back and look, is this required? Is this not required? You should have it in your policy as either link to the regulations, resources, and of course the National Weather Service heat index chart, which gives you the feels like temperature. Okay, so the passing the acclimatization test requires that you have a way of doing it for new workers and established workers, right? Monitoring when someone has symptoms is often missed, and according to research, only 10% of supervisors do it. That's really sad. That's very, very sad, because that means when someone, an employee is suffering symptoms, no one is asking him or her, hey, what's up with you? That's really what it is, and you're required to do it. We all know what acclimatization is, right? There's a regulation with the definition, but here it is what the outdoor requirement is. It means, make sure you acclimatize them during a heat wave and make sure that you acclimatize new workers during their first 14 days. That's all it says. It's up to you to document how you're doing it. But the indoor heat acclimatization requirement is more specific. It says you have to make sure that you do acclimatization during a heat wave. If it's a new employee, also during the first 14 days. But it also says if there's a work area where the temperature or heat index, whichever is greater, equals or exceeds 87 degrees Fahrenheit, you're acclimatizing workers there. And in a work area where the temperature equals or exceeds 82 degrees Fahrenheit for employees who wear aprons for welding, for example, then you're also acclimatizing them. And you're also going to acclimatize them whenever they are assigned to high radiant heat areas. So now we know. How are you going to know that an area of work is of high radiant heat, that there's a 5-degree difference if you don't buy those thermometers, if you're not already installing thermometers all throughout your facility? So now you can see why this is so important. This is the example forms that I was talking to you about for acclimatization. You give instructions to your supervisors, which I do for those of you in this call that have already a policy that we've reviewed together, and you want to make sure that you are tracking acclimatization. You have this form in your appendix, and it gives you to choose one either for a new worker or an established worker. Here is for my supervisors, and this is the last portion of our talk. You must what? Know your policy, know the regs. That's why it's important that you include them in the policy. Plan the work when it is hot. Be really good at recognitions and signs of symptoms. So you as a supervisor, you should know employees forget. And if you're relying on me coming quarterly and doing once a year the heat illness for employees as your only reminder, trust me, they're going to forget. So you are in charge of making sure that they know, hey, if it's cramps that you're having, let's give you some electrolytes, sit you in the cool, and if they don't go away in 20 minutes, you can't go back to being in a hot, radiant heat area or outdoors. And if 2 hours go by and those cramps are not subsiding, they're coming and going, and we're not getting rid of them, even though you sat down in the cool area and you drank your electrolytes and they're not going away, I got to drive you to the clinic. I got to make sure you are hydrated, because that's the sign of severe dehydration, and it could quickly take a turn for the worst. So you as a supervisor, you have to know this down pat. You can't rely on workers remembering what I told them last year, right? So you have to be very good at that. And that's why I like the app. The NIOSH app has a cheat sheet for early symptoms and response. And practice the emergency response, role play so that your workers know what to do, how to bring the core body temperature down. Document training and document those tailgates when it's 95 degrees or more for outdoor work. But if you're going to apply it also for indoor and your warehouse workers, make sure you document those tailgates. Make sure you monitor for symptoms. What does that mean? You have to ask them, are you okay? Oh, well, I have a headache. I don't feel good. It's very, very hot. And obviously, I just have a headache. Okay, that's early symptoms. And you got to turn it around by hydrating them, letting them rest till, symptoms abate, and just watching them and slowing down so that the symptoms don't get worse, and not ordering back to work until symptoms abate. Allow those breaks, encourage those breaks. Don't think that they're being lazy. Think about these breaks as they will stay more productive for longer. And use the forms I give you so that you can acclimatize them. Use the forms to record temperature measurements. That's your job as a supervisor. So all of that, 1 through 10, you must do from now on. This is an example of how to tell everyone, hey, if someone has symptoms where they have nausea and dizziness and we need to call 911, what do? Practice this. This is the part where I say role play is important. Here is an example of that form, the Appendix H temperature and measurement record. And I give you instructions. So I put when to take measurements. There's a whole, ABC of steps in that same form. And then page 2 of this form has the controls. How are you going to, what are you doing? Either you're bringing in the fan, you're bringing in the swamp cooler, or you are rotating people, or you started earlier that day. You have to document it once it is 82 degrees and above for people in high radiant heat areas, or 87 degrees and above for those that are not in radiant heat. So that has to be there. And now teach them. Supervisors need to know, what is a heat wave and monitor the weather. So take a look at this is the perfect example of a beach city with a heat wave. They were at 66 during the hottest time of the day at 12 p.m., 64 the next day, 61, 61, and a little bit cloudy, you can see. And then by Monday, May 5th, the temperatures spiked at 81 degrees, which triggers heat illness prevention and heat wave. And then what does need to happen? Acclimatization, because we were not used to the heat, right? All right. I hope we fulfilled our objectives. We did talk about each of those elements required in your written prevention plan. We talked about acclimatization that is not being done and what to do. And we talked about supervisors. What is it that it is required of you and the forms that you need to fill out and be on top of. All right. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. What I want to do now is I want to show you a little bit more of those forms. So I know I see some of the comments. Just give me a second. I'm going to share, see if I have my, hold on. I want to share some of these forms.
Alba, as you're doing that, I just wanted to let you know we do have a question in the Q&A feature.
Mm-hmm. Can you please read it for me? Thank you so
Of
much.
course. Yes. It says, hello, do my office employees also need to do the training for the indoor program? We are all hybrid, but work 3 days in office. I thought it was only for employees that could be affected by high temperatures.
So the answer is yes, if your office workers are in an environment where there is no air conditioning. So that's the first portion to the question. Another thing is, if they're not exposed to heat, they're inside an office, then they are not going to be subjected to all of the provisions of the policy. But what if those office workers you're referring to are supervising crews out there in the field? So they should be taking this class. Do you see what I mean? Why? Because they're supposed to make sure this happens, that workers are knowledgeable in regards to risk factors, environmental risk factors, that they are knowledgeable about heat waves, acclimatization, where's the water, where is the shade, how long can they rest and take breaks. So if those office workers, although they're in an AC office, if they supervise people out in the field, they have to have this training. Any other question? That was a very good question. I know you guys had questions that you submitted. Let me see if I cover them all. Number one is, can you give us some suggestions for the most effective and efficient way to incorporate indoor heat regulations into outdoor? Well, the sample program, that's your best bet. The sample program by OSHA, which I use, which I customize, which I tell all of my clients, use that because it incorporates both. So that's the most effective one. Number two, can you tell us more about the indoor heat standard? I talked extensively about it. And then we went step by step. If you have more questions about it, you can also submit it via email. Info for a new heat stress safety program. We went through each of the elements required. So I like that I answered that. FedOSHA, is FedOSHA going to adopt a heat illness prevention program standard? With all of the changes and the fact that there's so much restrictions to budget uh, for OSHA and NIOSH, etc., I don't think they're going to pass that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point, but it doesn't matter. You're still, if you have employees that are doing work under federal jurisdiction, have a policy for heat illness prevention. You have to have it because even the feds will cite if there's heat illness that the employees are suffering. And if there's no policy, you are breaking the general duty clause. That's what they call it. Who has a heat illness prevention program in place and what are they doing in their facility to prevent heat illness? So I talked about it briefly. I said, for warehousing or places of employment where there's indoor heat, the first thing you're doing is you're installing thermometers. You need to know how hot it is. That's the first thing. And then you need to know how much can you bring the temperature down? What are you going to do to bring the temperature down? So some of you are bringing those big industrial fans, and you're taking a look at the ones that actually do better job than just regular fans, but making sure that circulation of cooler air in the morning gets in. That's an engineering control. Swamp coolers, all of that. But you cannot start implementing all of that unless you know how hot is it in your place of employment. So start by installing those thermometers and then looking into, the hierarchy of controls: engineering, substitution, and I'm sorry, elimination, substitution, engineering, administrative, and PPE. What kind of cooling garments will you give the workers? And we're doing it. And I hope that by the discussion today, you got a response to that question as well. And then the last request was I would like to brush up on illness prevention requirements. I think we did that also extensively by walking you through each of those written elements and giving you examples. All right, so we are at 12:03. I know you guys, your bellies are saying, go get me some lunch. Have a great weekend. I, as always, had a lot of fun. I am grateful to all of you. I'm grateful for your time. And I invite you to continue to subscribe to the newsletter and to make sure that you spread the message. So make sure when you get the email with the link and the actual feedback survey, that you answer that and that you distribute the link to the YouTube channel to all of those that need it, especially your supervisors. Veronica, I'm very grateful to you. And for those of you that want the actual copy of the form that I showed on my slideshow, such as the record, how to record temperatures for indoor heat, let us know. We'll send it to you. And also all of those NIOSH CDC for work rest schedules, etc.
Thank you so much, Alba, and thank you everybody for being here. We'll see you next month.
Awesome. Thank you.